What up, guys? Today, Eugene and I, my beautiful, handsome host, we're going to be sharing some ideas with you guys on how to get the most from instructionals. So, the people that joined my Executors Challenge, that's a big thing. A lot of people have instructionals that they have, but they haven't really used them as well as they could, and they want to get some tips on that. So I gave them some ideas. I'll share some of them with you guys today. And then a lot of times I see this all the time because, again, instructionals are this thing where, um, I think that here's what I think it is. I think people have this weird idea that, like, because we've been so tricked by marketers over the years, right? That there's this product, because a lot of times marketing back in the day would be like, we're going to make you think you need this product, but really you don't, right? And then so instructionals are a way that a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners, including myself, we make a little extra money for ourselves, right? So I think that sometimes people are apprehensive because they think someone's just trying to get me over, right? They're just trying to get something over on me. At least that's some of the messaging that I've seen from people, right? They're very resistant. A lot of jiu-jitsu people are very weird about money, right? They're like, these guys are just trying to squeeze money out of me. The reality is that yes, it's how someone makes money, but again, this is the trade, right? And someone's dedicated their life to a skill, just like a doctor or a lawyer or someone else who's dedicated years to something. If they were going to exchange their services and their knowledge with me, I'm okay with paying. And it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu practitioners, right? So with that, it's this collection of information. And in many cases, it can be very dense and it can be very overwhelming. And so, what we're doing today is we're going to go through some ways to make this simple because you're faced with a lot of options on instructionals, how to simplify that process and what to choose, but also how to find, like, how do you break this thing down so you can actually use it? Because again, many of you probably have instructionals that are sitting around, you're not doing anything with them, right? And there's very simple ways to go through this process to get the most out of it. Stuff that I've been doing it since I was a white belt. And the process has gotten more and more refined, but nonetheless, it's still the same stuff I've really been doing as a white belt, and I've got a lot from it. I remember very early on that I started using instructionals, and in one case, me and my buddy Chris, we were studying down in my basement. We bought some mats. We had a DVD player. We bought the DVDs right back in the day when there was still DVDs. This is 2003, and I remember going back to practice and using techniques my coach had not shown me that we had been practicing on the DVD. And my coach even said, he like comes over to us. He's like, "Where'd you learn that? You've been watching those DVDs, haven't you?" And so again, I would like you guys to have that same experience because it feels really good to actually be able to take something from something you're trying to learn and actually be able to execute it in a live situation. So we're going to jump into that today, and I hope this helps you guys out. As always, thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never checked them out, try them out. Again, I'm a fan of their product. For a guy who is getting up there in closer and closer to the 40s, recovery is a big deal for me, right? I'm always trying to try something else, whether it's an ice bath or a new supplement or a new multivitamin or whatever it is. I'm always trying to try something out to help my recovery. And one of the supplements that is in my recovery repertoire is the Charlotte's Web CBD. So again, I take a tincture usually at night, sometimes the gummies, and I try it at night. And I feel like it helps out with my overall sleep schedule, right? Like the way that my sleep quality is. And again, there's a lot of cool benefits from it. It's not FDA regulated. So again, all that stuff has an asterisk next to it. But again, if you look at a lot of the anecdotal evidence from people who have taken it, there's a lot of good stuff out there. You can do your own research on it, right? But again, if you'd like to try out their supplements and see what you think, maybe get a tincture for yourself and try it out for 30 days. Or if you've tried other CBD before and maybe you were like, I don't know, like it wasn't that good, try their stuff out. You might find that because they have a higher quality standard for themselves and their product, that you might find a difference. And again, their website is charlottesweb.com. And the promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. Also, thanks to my buddy Matt at Epic Roll. If you guys watch my YouTube videos, you will see from time to time I'm wearing t-shirts that say things like triangle choke or Kimura. They have these definitions. And, again, there's some cool little t-shirts that he has. Those are Epic Roll's t-shirts. So again, if you guys go to his website, epicrollbjj.com, the promo code on there, if you want to save 20% and, support the podcast, is Jiu-Jitsu20. Now, again, he's got everything from gis and rash guards and shorts and anything related to jiu-jitsu as far as gear and apparel. He has it. And you can get it all at epicrollbjj.com for 20% off. Also, if you guys would like to support the podcast and get access to the exclusive library that we've created for the podcast listeners, you can check it out at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you join, you'll get access to the library, which has content from each one of the guests that we've had, which ranges from everything from, world champion black belts, ADCC champion black belts, doctors who focus on training, doctors who focus on, fixing back problems and all kinds of stuff that we have in there. Along with that, you get rolling videos, warm-up videos from Eugene. Again, Eugene is a doctor of physical therapy who's a black belt as well. So you get all that and more, all at the patreon.com or patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you'd like to get my daily email and get access to a couple free ebooks, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join the website or join my Chew Crew email list, you'll get my daily email where I'll go through everything from philosophical ideas I'm chewing on, training ideas, everything and more. And then also I talk a lot of times about sharing different offers, and people in the Chew Crew get exclusive discounts. And then upon joining, you will get access to an exclusive set of ebooks. One is on developing your own jiu-jitsu game plan. Very simple to follow, but again, it can be very useful. It was a practice that I did back in the day as I was getting ready for competitions, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to focus my drilling on and sharing it with you guys. And then the other one is on how to break through jiu-jitsu plateaus using specific drilling strategies, both passive and active. Some interesting stuff in there can be very useful to your training. And some of it could work with what we're about to share right now with the ideas coming from Instructionals. There's some strategies there. So again, that's at chewjitsu.net/join. So guys, let's jump into this today. So again, I've gotten a lot of questions from people over the years about whether or not, jiu-jitsu instructionals are worth it, whether or not it's just some sort of basically way that people, some sort of scam or something. I think everybody's worried about getting scammed by someone, right? Like they're just trying to hose me for money, whatever. So check this out. I've been using instructionals, and I still do to this day, because again, what you're paying for when you get an instructionals, you're paying for someone who has gone down the rabbit hole, figured out some really good stuff, and now they're saying, hey, here you go, right? This is something that's been very useful to me, my students, whatever, and I'm packaging it up. Here you go. But again, when you get a hold of these things, it can be a overwhelming thing because you're now looking at the accumulation of years of work. And depending on the style of teaching that person shares, this could be laid out very seamlessly. It could also sometimes be very, disconnected. It could also be sometimes tight and concise. And sometimes it can be sort of long-winded. You never know, because again, it depends on the person. But again, they can be very overwhelming. So let's talk about some ideas on how to deal with this. The first one is how to decide on what instructional you're going to use, right? Like if you're looking at I was talking to one of my white belt students about this just recently. He was like, hey, how do I decide which instructional to get? And because I know his game, I could help him out a little bit more than you guys. But again, you can start asking yourself these questions, right? This is what I did also as a white belt. Here's a couple simple questions to ask yourself. One, what positions are you already getting to? It's a good thing to start with, because you got to think about it this way. It's going to be easier to add on to the structure that's already in place, right? If we have a game that, is over here, and then all of a sudden we're now going into a position that we have absolutely no experience with and no part of our game connects with it, that's going to be very difficult. So for instance, let's say that you only know how to play full guard, right? But then you're watching this instructional on how to play reverse daily heave and invert and stuff like that. That's going to be a big disconnection from those two positions. They're not related. They're there's a lot of little steps that you would have to have in between. Now, if you're already playing a lot of daily heave and you're like, so let's play reverse daily, but fine, easy adjustment. It connects to it very easily. Or you could say, you know what? I find myself getting to mount, back mount, side control, whatever position it is, but man, I can't finish anyone, right? This is something that happened to me when I was a white belt. Basically, I could take people down, I could pass their guard, and I could get to side control. But once I got to side control, couldn't finish anyone. And so when I got my DVD, the first DVD that I pulled out of that disc set, I've still got them around here somewhere in my office, is the side control disc. And I got it, and I found some techniques that worked perfect for me. One of them was the Kimura. I found a really good setup to the Kimura. I've been using it ever since. I've made some adjustments over the years. But again, I use that. Now, the other question that I think could be really useful to ask yourself is, well, what's not working for me? Where am I having trouble? Right. Which again is kind of, you're finding yourself in that position already, right? Or you're having trouble with that position already, but it's now on the defensive side of things, right? You're having it done to you. So maybe you got to work on your defense, your escapes. You're getting smashed or whatever it is. Well, then that's the position you got to go to. And so again, that's a really simple way to start. And these are, by the way, let me pull back just a little bit. When I'm sharing these strategies with you, I'm sharing these strategies with the idea that you're not running your class, that you have no control over the curriculum of your gym, and that you're going to have to do this either with a partner or with very little instruction from your coaches. Okay. This way, again, this is how you would go through this process. Because again, if your coach can take you through different ways to get to these positions, that's great. Because obviously they could get you to reverse De La Riva or whatever position you want to play. But if not, then we're going to have to, connect the dots a little bit, because you want your game to sort of essentially look like a flow chart. We go from this position to this position to this position. It all connects. And again, if it doesn't connect, then it's going to be very difficult for you to develop that game if your coach is not allowing you to have like very specific situational rounds, things like that. But the first two questions I would ask yourself with an instructional, if you're going to use one, is one, where am I getting to that I would like to make better? Or where am I getting to that I'm having trouble, right? And again, if you do want to add a new position, that's fine, but it needs to be very easily able to connect to what you have already in the positions.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think for like the white belts out there. So I think if you're finding yourself in certain positions, absolutely go for, fine tune those, get those better and make those more effective. I think for me, using instructionals as like, brown belt, black belt, I was looking at maybe I was having success obviously in certain areas, but certain areas I was lacking, like people that with less skill than me, but they were better maybe at leg locks. I was feeling vulnerable there. I was like, that's a hole in my game. So that's something obviously I worked on in class, but also wanted extra time in. So if you're a black belt, maybe you're find yourself getting caught in certain positions and don't know what to do, which I think you got to have a understanding of every position at this point. You don't have to be great at everything, but have some understanding in every position. For me, it was like, where am I the weakest? Where do I feel the most vulnerable to attack and try to kind of fill up those gaps a little bit. So
right, and that's the idea, right? Because again, if we focus on somewhere, because this works at every level.
Absolutely,
we're already getting to this position, and we have this desire to like seal the deal, to finish it, to sweep it, to whatever, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You're going to have the desire, and you're going to have some experience with that position, so that then this way, when you watch the videos, instructionals, you're going to remember the information. It's just like when or on the other side of it, if you're getting smashed from there, then you're going to have a desire to not get smashed. What we were doing this morning. So for this incident, we just finished with mount. We're now working on a back mount focused phase of training. So typically in the first week, whenever I'm teaching a particular position, I like, especially with these dominant positions, I like to put people in the position, and we'll do some drills and stuff like that to get warmed up and to set the position up a little bit. But I will give them less instruction early on, especially for my more experienced students, the students that have some training, because what I want them to do is I want them to get into the position, fumble a little bit, right, to experience it. So this way, when I say, okay, remember last week when you guys were having trouble with hand fighting? Here's the detail that's going to make a big difference for you.
Yep.
Now you're ready for it, right? Because again, it's the information that's ahead of time is usually not as useful as the information in the nick of time.
Yep.
Or another way to think of it is like, if I'm going to plow the field, or if I'm going to plant a seed, I'd like to plow the field. I'd like to loosen up the dirt a little bit to plant that seed down into it. And so by getting the students to, they're having trouble with the position, or maybe, the person was defending something that they were trying to do. Then when I add those tips into it the next week, or we start to drill the techniques this week, they're going to see, oh, this is why this is so important, because like last week, every time I was fighting for the back mount, the person was able to defend. And if I get top position with my hands, I'm in control, So that's the idea. Again, it doesn't mean I send them in there blind, but we do a lot of situational rolling, and I don't give them as much instruction because I want them to have more experience, and I want them to be ready to learn the information later on. So you can think about it this way. When you're finding yourself in a position that you're struggling with or a position that you'd like to get better with, you've already plowed the field. The soil's nice and loose and it's ready for that information, because as soon as those tips come out, you know, in this instructional, you're going to start seeing, that's what I should be doing because of the experience. If you have absolutely no experience with a position, it's very difficult to rapidly take the information in through an instructional, because you don't have any experience. You don't know what it feels like. You don't know why. Yes, you know, the guy on the DVD is saying this is what you should do, but you're like, I don't know why I should be doing that, even though that's what he's saying. But then when you get into the position, you can feel why that's important.
Yep. No, I agree. And it gives you a little bit like, oh, you get something, you pick something up, a little tidbit, gives you some excitement to take back and retry and retest and see if
because you're like that was it. It's like you're looking at
detail,
it's like the little puzzle piece, right? Like you're looking around, you know, you got the big puzzle in front of you on the table and you're looking for that one piece, and then bam, you found it. You get excited. You found the puzzle piece that was missing. You get to put it in there. It's that same kind of idea. You're problem solving. You're looking for the piece of the puzzle that's missing, and then all of a sudden someone in a instructional shows you a small hand grip and you're like, there it is. Hot damn. You know, and I, you know, even as a black belt, I have those moments all the time where I'll see someone do something so simple. I'm like, that was fantastic. Like my whole game isn't revolutionized, but by changing a small grip, damn, that was really useful. Right. That whole you know, DVD of, you know, between 50 to like $200, that was worth it.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah. I agree with that. Like that saves you so much frustration. It can save you so much frustration, so much like, oh man, I'm not progressing. It could be just one little piece you get from it. It could really just change things up and spark some growth in your game for sure.
That's right. And this kind of goes into what we're talking about next, which would be how to break it down, right? So a lot of people, when they get into these instructionals, they can mistakenly think that if they don't somehow devour and memorize the whole thing, that they didn't get value from it, right? I want you to think about this. Think about a book that you've read, right? For those of you listening, do you remember everything from that book? I doubt it, right? Even if like there's books that I have read multiple times, like, you know, dozens of times, because I think they're so good, right? For instance, The War of Art. That's a book I read nearly every year because it just it motivates me. And the main idea that I go back to is the fight with resistance. You know, I've read things like the Meditations, and I've read other books over and over again. You know, when I read Myth of Sisyphus, you know, by Camus, right? The main idea, the story of it, he's talking about it the whole time, but the main idea is finding, you know, if Sisyphus is going to push the boulder up the hill over and over again for eternity, and every time it gets to the top, it's going to drop back down again, just like us. Everything we do, every time we get to the top of a hill, we accomplish a goal. Seemingly, we feel like we're back at the bottom because it's over, right? So none of it seems to really matter in the end. So really what it is about finding the love of the doing in the middle process, right? We have to imagine that Sisyphus is happy in the middle when he's pushing the boulder up. That was the main idea I got from it. Now, I read the book, but that was the main thing I got from it. Now, so think about it that way. When you're doing this, you will, you know, over time, you could rewatch it, get more and more from it. But what you're focused on when you're getting these instructionals is not remembering everything. You're focused on getting just a handful, maybe even just one really useful idea, some useful thing that you can execute on with in your jiu-jitsu and put it to work, right? Like going back to the instructional that I got as a white belt, that whole side control disc, because it was like 12 or 16 discs. The whole side control disc, which was like an hour long, I got like 2 things off of it. But I still use those 2 things as a black belt. Like it literally put me on a path to black belt with 2 things I learned off of a DVD. Crazy, right? That whole, I learned other stuff from it, but that whole disc set was worth it just for those 2 things that I got from it. And again, this is the difference. You think about Hodger Gracie, right? Hodger Gracie talks about this in, you know, some different things where he's like, look, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu, but I've only mastered like a handful of things. You know, that's it.
Yep.
So again, in jiu-jitsu, that's what we're really after. We're after finding those things that are going to be our essentially, we all have a deck of cards essentially, and everybody's got their aces, you know, and in your face cards. You only get so many of them. We're always after those. Now we're going to know other stuff. We're going to have our, you know, 2 of spades and stuff, but it's those aces that we're always looking for. We're always trying to find new ones. And so again, if you can find an ace in one of those, that whole instructional is worth it, you know? And so let's talk about breaking it down. So the big thing I treat breaking down an instructional very similarly to a book, right? If you read a book, You can passively go over it with your eyes. You can read the whole thing and you will remember almost none of it, right? It was fun. You felt good. You get to close the book up and say, I read the whole book, and you get that satisfaction from it. But really, if it was a book that you were trying to get something from, if it's a novel and you're just reading it for enjoyment, fine.
Yeah.
But if it's like a nonfiction book, something you're trying to extract ideas from, if you didn't mark up the page, if you didn't write in the margins, and if you didn't take notes on it and really work with that information, you didn't get much from it. Like you don't have much retention from it, right? And again, speed reading is bullshit, right? Like we understand this. So going through an instructional and just passively looking through the whole thing and not stopping to really examine what's going on, it's going to be a waste of time long term, right? You might get something from it. I'm not saying that. You might enjoy just listening to guys talk about jiu-jitsu. There's a possibility, but you'll get far more from it if you can focus. Now, there's nothing wrong with going through different parts of that instructional and treating it as if like maybe you were not sure about the instructional and you wanted to go through the chapters or excuse me, of a book, and you wanted to look through the chapters of a book and say, okay, what's in this book? I'm curious. And then figuring out what you want to do. Same thing you can say with the instructional, because an instructional it's not exactly like a book. It's not a narrative tied to it. So you could think of it as more as like an instruction manual maybe. And you say like, well, what part do you want to focus on right now? And you can just look for the chapter that you think is going to best serve you. And then, once you look through it, then you focus. Now, once you find something that you think is actually going to help you, you stop. That's it. Let's focus on this now, right? We don't need to keep watching everything. This is the problem with like, for instance, like short form Instagram videos. Yes, you can probably get a little bit from them from time to time. But what ends up happening with like when you watch a bunch of Instagram or you scroll, you see a bunch of stuff and you don't do anything with it. It's entertaining. It's fun, tickles your brain, right? And that's the problem with our brains are little collectors, right? Our brain loves novelty. It just loves information. But again, what we want, if you're trying to get better, is you want to do something so much and work with that information so much that it's almost boring to you. Now, I don't see it as boring because I know what this means generally. I get more excited when information is basically becoming so repetitive that I know it like without thinking about it. That's when I get that's why I start geeking out about that, because I know what that actually means. But a lot of times people get kind of bored. Like, I already know this. It's like, let's go deeper. Let's do more with this stuff. So when you find the instructional and you find the thing you want to work on, you stop. Stop taking in more information. We have to go on the information diet a little bit, which is something you should do if you're going to focus on instructional. Stop watching short form videos, right? We're in the long form game. We want to watch someone really break down an idea. We want to watch them actually tease out all the details. It's going to be hard to do that in 60 seconds. This is where we're going to get the information. And then you watch what they're doing and say, okay, that's what I was looking for. And then you watch the video over and over again. And then you go to the gym and we'll talk about that more in a second. But that's how I would break it down. You could look through the instructional to kind of get a feel for it, glance at the chapters. And then once you find the chapter that you think is what you're looking for, that could solve the problem that you're having, watch the information in that. And then when you find something that's going to serve you and you're like, oh, that was the exact problem I was having, or I think I can make that work, stop and watch it again. And that is your area of focus for a little while. You don't need to watch the whole thing. You need to stop there and go through that information over and over again.
Yeah, when I find that piece that I'm like, oh, that's something I need to work on, I'll usually take some screenshots or screen record that segment so I have it. I may take a few notes on it, but a lot of times the explanation's in the video itself. So if you take a screenshot, I mean, you might need to take a few notes, but like I'll usually maybe screen record that segment and I'll write that, and I'll kind of write that down. And I'm even going to write a few notes to myself, maybe a few keywords or things that I think it's important for me to focus on. Because it could be like a 3-minute segment or whatever it is, but there could be a few pieces that it's really important to focus on. I will dive into that just because sometimes it's things that I feel like are important that I'll easily forget. That, or like a hand, like a grip or a position, or like maybe some kind of placement of the hand or whatever it is. But that stuff, because I think sometimes those little details are what make it work. Those little details could be the difference in this, a technique that works or doesn't. So
very much so.
That's something I do. So
no, I do the same thing. So like one of my little tricks, I guess you'd say, is that let's say if I'm watching an instructional, if I find something that I'm like, ooh, this is good. And let's say that there's a couple of small points that like, oh, maybe, maybe this is the detail that I was missing, or maybe this is something slightly different. I will either take screenshots like you're talking about, like I'll record, like I'll take pictures of my phone, or I'll take a short recording of it.
Mhm.
And then in my folder, like I have an iPhone, I don't know how Androids work, but in my iPhone, in my photos, I can create folders for all of my images and my
Mm.
pictures, right? And what I do is I will put those particular things in a folder labeled for the position. So let's say, for instance, if I'm working on mount, I will put everything into that mount folder that pertains to mount. So this way I can go back and I can glance at it. And then in my notes or my Google Doc, I have a folder specifically for the notes that I'm taking for mount or whatever. So this way I can look at these notes, I can jog my memory. And especially for before you're training, you can simply say, okay, like I want to work on that technique from the instructional. Instead of having to pull up the whole instructional, I just pull up my essentially these pictures that work like bullet points. It's like,
Mhm.
here, get the arm, do this. Okay, cool. I'm ready. Let's go practice. And then I can go focus on that technique and I can try to hit it instead of having to watch the whole instructional over again. And then what you do then is after you're executing these techniques, right? Well, then you go back and you watch it again. And this is the power. There's a lot of power in spaced repetition. They've done a lot of studies on this where basically if you can space out your learning battles or your learning bouts with space, just, time off, right? This could be a day, this could be a week, whatever, that there is an increased retention of the information.
Mhm.
So again, you might find that it could be really useful to, focus on this and then take a little bit of time off, then come back to it the next week or whatever, next day or a couple days later, and reviewing the information rather than just doing it one time and then one and done.
Mhm. Yep. And I think the other piece is you have to go implement. You have to just you get that information, but then you have to practice it. So you have to have an ability to perform these techniques. And I think once you go and you perform the techniques, you try them out. You might say, "Oh, this feels good," or "This doesn't feel good." You go back and you rewatch
Yeah.
and see if there's anything you missed.
Yeah. And you guys, a couple, we'll get into the next tip. This is kind of like a side tip. If you can get a battle buddy, a battle bro, a person to practice with on the mat, that would be really useful. That was like for a long time, that was one of my secret weapons to getting better at jiu-jitsu faster than
Mm.
most people. It's not a secret, of course, but when I look back at my jiu-jitsu, I got better at jiu-jitsu rapidly, much faster than most of my peers. Now, yes, I was hyper focused on it, and I basically did as little other stuff as I could to let myself train more. That said, I always had friends that I was training with. And so for like a long time, like when I first got into jiu-jitsu, I bought mats.
Mhm.
Again, I'm 18 years old, right? There's no excuse. I figured it out. I made sacrifices elsewhere, right? I didn't buy a lot of extra clothes and stuff like that. I had mats. So I bought mats and I put them down in our basement. We used to practice, me and my buddy. And then later on, I remember in our first house, we had mats. We had a mat room down in the basement. So we had a mat room, like, me and a couple jiu-jitsu guys living together. We had a mat room, and we would get together and practice techniques and drill. Like it'd be like, hey man, I saw this technique. Let me try this on you real quick. And we could practice anytime we wanted to. And even today, when I'm done with this podcast, I have a student, DT. We're going to go drill at 5. I want to go practice some drills I'm working on. So again, get a battle buddy. And I know that it can be tough, but I know it's so weird. We live in a hyper connected world, but sometimes we feel disconnected from everyone.
Sure.
There's probably people in your gym that want to improve. So you can say, hey man, does anybody want to drill? I know some of my students that are doing this too. It's a great idea. So find a battle buddy and start drilling together and start working together. It can be incredibly useful. And to kind of give you like a little strategy with that before we move on to the next thing, when me and my buddy Chris, when we would drill like this. We would practice the same technique like for an entire week
Mm.
on the instructional. We wouldn't move. Like when we found a technique that was kind of helping us in class, when we lived together. So, this, you may not be able to do it this way, but every day we would do reps of the technique. And then we would just wrestle around a little bit, right? But we would always get our reps in of the technique. And then the next week we would move on, and then we would review of the old technique, but then we'd start practicing the new technique, and we would do that one for a week and so forth. And so again, lots of repetitions and lots of time and space with those movements. Now, with that said, here's a trick. This is going to be tricky for some of you guys because some of you guys are new. Some of you guys are more experienced, right? And some of you guys are really good, right? We have a wide variation of people listening on this podcast, everything from white to black. So there's going to be some strategies that you're going to have to implement depending on your level of training and who you're training with to actually attempt these things, right? If you're a white belt and you're going with a black belt who is going like, their regular speed, you're not going to be able to do anything, right? You're not going to be able to practice anything. You are going to be focused 100% on just surviving as best you can. So oftentimes you'll hear people talk about it's really good to roll with people that aren't as good as you, that aren't as experienced as you. This is where the magic of jiu-jitsu really starts to happen if you want to get good. Okay. So when you get a chance, I was talking to one of my white belts about this recently. In the beginning, you're just going to have to survive. You got to just do your best and you'll get your skill when you can, right? Once you start to have a level of experience and skill over some of your training partners, you have now this choice of you can just go smash them and like feel good about your ego. Like, I feel so good. And, maybe there's a time to smash people and be in that kind of, I've got to win every round mode if you're getting ready for a competition or something like that. Right. But if we're trying to actually get better at skill, we want to actually make ourselves better and we want to learn more information, then we want to put ourselves in these positions that we're trying to work on. So let's say, for instance, that you are we'll say a white belt with 4 stripes. Okay. And, I obviously know that, stripes don't mean everything, but let's say you're a decently experienced white belt. The new guys are coming in, these new white belts are there and you can beat them for sure. But let's say you're trying to work on your guard because you're not very good at it. Well, you can play from your guard and you're probably going to you're probably going to lose a round or two doing so because, if you're not very good at it, they're probably going to beat you. They're going to pass your guard and they might catch you in a submission, right? Or you can just be, I'm going to take the person down and be on top of them and smash them. Now, you're still going to get better one way or the other, but one is going to give you a whole new game. One is going to you're going to learn far more rapidly because you're trying to work on this thing. And if you bought an instructional for full guard, that's what you should be working on. Yes, you're going to get submitted by some of the people. You're going to get beaten by the people that you could potentially beat. But it's kind of like the old adage, right? You got to crack a couple eggs. To make an omelet. And so you got to be willing to fail a little bit. This is something that me and my student Brandon talked about today. So Brandon he's a pain in the butt to deal with as it is. He's really good. Well, he was trying to slow his escapes down because he knows he can scramble out of things a lot, but he's trying to slow it down and be very much more technical with it. So this way, if he then later on works on using his athleticism, it can combine athleticism and technique rather than being mostly athleticism. And, he was getting caught in things that he wouldn't normally get caught in. But it's good because now he's going to get better because of this. Now he can always turn the burners up and go be more athletic. But again, he's trying to get better at technique. This is why, I'm all about being strong. I'm all about using your strength, but it's about efficiently using it. And I'll say to people, let's use a little less strength. Now, I'm not saying don't use any strength. What I'm telling you to do is use a little less strength so you can really understand the technique and be as efficient as possible. And this way, when you need that strength, you add that back in and it becomes like a magical power for a superpower for jiu-jitsu. You get a guy who is technical and absurdly strong, and you have someone that is just like, it's so tough to deal with. It's hard to deal with them, right? Because then it's like they maintain that strength through the full round because they're not using it up excessively. And they have the technique, and they have this technique that's also got a lot of horsepower behind it. So going back to it, you're trying to add these techniques into it. Try to find people that are less experienced than you and put yourself in those positions to work on these techniques. You may lose a little bit in the process, but that's what we have to do. Now, when you go against higher belts, people that are more experienced than you do what you can. But the truth is they could probably beat you, and they may beat you. But when you're rolling with those less experienced people, that's going to be your best chance to work on this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And then I think you brought up a really good point with technique and strength, right? If you both have equal strength, then the technique's going to be the differential factor versus if you both have equal technique, but somebody's stronger, more explosive, faster, that's going to give them the edge. So I think you got to look at Brandon's got all the horsepower that anyone could have or need, really. And he's got great cardio. So it's like if he's going to probably find somebody, when he's doing ADCC trials, it's going to have pretty similar level of athleticism. There's a lot of wrestlers in those tournaments and those trials. So if his technique is better, if he's comfortable with slowing it down and having to use more technique, it's going to be advantageous. You're not going to feel like a fish out of water. You're going to feel like, oh shit, I don't have my, my burners aren't going to do the trick this time. You're going to have
Yeah.
something up your sleeve. And I think it gives you a little extra layer of confidence there too.
Well, he also understands this because he was a small heavyweight in the heavyweight division, right? So he couldn't just out wrestle, out brute
muscle
people, out muscle people. There we go. Thank you. He had to learn ways to finesse people and use technique, but then also using his strength when it mattered, right? So he will feel stronger sometimes than what he is because he knows how to use it at the right time. And he can maintain that strength for a long period of time because he doesn't use it up at the wrong times, right? It's like when you're escaping out of a side control position, right? You're going to have to use some strength when you're pushing on people. The key is we want to make sure we're pushing at the right time so that we're not exhausting our arms and then being a, friggin' dead piece of meat for the person to just chew up afterwards, right? But again, this is just important because it can be very easy to go into these roles with less experienced people and just want to play your A game and just do what you always do, right? And there's not necessarily, there's a time for that. But you want to make sure that you're using this as a chance to get better, because this is how you're going to get better faster, is by being very intentional. This is why, a lot of black belts they start to get really, like, the higher you get, like, a lot of people will talk about that they got better. And I thought about this. I thought I got better faster as I got more experience. But really what it was is as I got better in jiu-jitsu, as I won more stuff, as I, was a higher level, and I accomplished more for myself, I felt less of a need to basically beat everybody up on the mat. And I felt more of a need to, like, I want to get better. And so I started getting better, not because of that, but because whenever I was rolling with the less experienced people, I was just working on that stuff over and over again. I was working on my weakest part of my game. And that was actually, as a brown, like when a purple belt going towards brown belt, that was a lesson my coaches had to give me, because I just wanted to win all the roles. And I remember my coaches coming up to me as a purple belt. I was at a different gym at this point. I'd changed gyms for my first gym. And they told me, they said, Chewy, listen, man, if you want to be a brown belt, you got to, like, open up your game. You do, like, the same 5 moves and you're not expanding. You're not getting better. Right. We know you can beat these people on the mat, right? We know you can beat these blue and white belts. We want to see you do something else. We want to see you expand your game. And again, that initially made my game a little bit worse. But then after about 6 months to a year, all of a sudden I noticed that my game was getting rapidly better, because now I had a different mindset that I was using. And I also had a whole lot of new options to my game. And so again, keep that in mind. If you guys are trying to, do jiu-jitsu and doing this stuff, that was something that helped me out. And I wish I would have done that as a white belt. That's something I wish I would have been doing from the beginning. Once I was a good white belt and I was beating some of the guys and I was getting kind of a little ego boost from it, I wish I would have used them for, more for training rather than just getting my ego boost. But, young, insecure guys, sometimes stuff happens, right?
Yeah. It feels good to win, it does. But it's practice too. It didn't really count.
And that's it. It doesn't count. Your practice rounds don't count. They're training.
I mean, it sucks. Nobody wants to lose, of course, even in practice. However, there's a time to, if you're prepping for a tournament, there's a time to turn the burners on and really use your A game and fine tune that. And there's time not to do that. And I think if you're just trying to grow, it's kind of like maybe, quote unquote, your off season. You're trying to grow your game and trying to develop, trying to bring up the other aspects that maybe aren't as good.
Now, and if you have a drilling partner, right, and you have someone to do that with, or if you're at an open mat or open rolling session and your coach allows this, you could go up to the person and say, hey, man, I'm trying to work on back mount. Can we work from there? Can we just start in that position? And then you guys go back and forth, whatever. And this is a fantastic strategy. So as an example, I'm giving you guys examples as we're going through how this stuff works. So years ago, when I started implementing situational rolling, because you got to think, jiu-jitsu is always, I feel like jiu-jitsu is behind sort of training strategies by some years. In some cases, it's catching up now, but years ago, it was basically just, we come in, we beat each other up, and we try to submit each other. That was it. Back in 2009, 2010, one of my training partners was a guy named Jason Keaton. So he's down in Georgia now. And Jason was one of my training partners back then. And Jason had a disgustingly heavy side control. And at the time, side control was my worst position to escape from. If you got to mount, I could escape. If you got to my back, I was getting out. But if you got me to side control, I really struggled there. Now, Jason, on the other hand, was really bad and it's all relative. He wasn't bad, but it was his struggle. He was bad from back mount. And so what we did was we went back and forth, exchanging ideas about what we're doing on top,
Mhm.
and in the offensive position so we could escape from it, and picking at each other's brains a little bit, right? And then when we were rolling, we were just doing situational rolls. So if I escaped side control, I would go back to side control. When the timer went off, we would switch and I would go to his back. And if he got out of the back mount, we'd reset and go again. And we just spent time in these positions. We would do this for hours on a Sunday during our open mat time. So instead of just going for a regular open mat and just rolling and seeing what happens, which is really fun, by the way,
Mhm.
and sometimes is what you need, right? Mentally, you just need to turn your brain off and just go get some rolls in. Ain't nothing wrong with that. But again, when you're trying to get better at something, it requires a lot more focus. And so we did this. And I remember that time with him really helped out because I knew that my side control escapes had gotten better. I knew that I could get out of a side control. So if I went against someone and they got me, they passed my guard, it was like, I'm not worried because I know I can get out of this position. And so again, with you guys, if you're listening to this and if you're listening to hear my voice, you hear this, obviously. If you're studying an instructional or whatever it is, think about the position that you're trying to work on. And if you can, talk to one of your training partners and say, can I work from that? Even if it's just even if it's not like an open mat, if it's just an open rolling session, maybe you're trying to work on your side control escapes. Say, hey,
Mhm.
bro, can we start with you in side control on top of me? Or maybe, you're rolling with someone, say, hey, could we start in full guard for this round or whatever position you want to? Just try to start in that position and ask them if they're okay with doing it. And if you can make it like to where you guys only work from that position, that's great. If not, at least if you start there, you got at least one chance to get a rep there.
So we talked about Chewy, learning before the podcast started, we talked about learning being a pretty intense practice. Like
Mm-hmm.
you talked about learning, riding a horse. You're fatigued, like if I'm learning or I'm doing something new, I'm tired, mentally and physically tired after really investing in that.
Yeah.
And I can only do that for short bouts. So let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about maybe how do we get the most out of our time? Because like more is not always better, right? Like, oh, I'm
No.
studying this for 2 hours, and you realize that you have retained 10 minutes worth of information or something
Yeah.
like that. So let's talk about maybe I think for me, I have a certain time that I allow myself to intensely learn. And then, especially when I'm doing instructionals, because I think after that, I either need to take a break or I need to stop because I don't think I retain any more information.
Right.
So, for you, what do you think as far as like segments of learning, blocks of learning? How do you try to bunch that in? How do you make that kind of use the most out of your time?
I mean, there's studies and stuff on it to like say how much is optimal and how much time we really have. But
Mhm.
you're getting into the idea of deep work where your brain is really firing. We're giving something our undivided attention. And again, guys, this is something where the people that are doing my executor challenge this month, one of the first things I told them to do is put yourself on an information diet. Like every day I delete, like, so again, you don't have to do this. I waste time on Instagram. So I
Me
delete
too.
Instagram off my phone every day. I use it for a few hours in the middle of the day to do what I want to do, answer DMs, see stuff, and I delete it off my phone so I don't check it in the morning. I don't look at it. I got stuff to do, right? And I just know that I waste my time there, and it gives me too much input. So you want to manage your inputs there, right? But when you're giving something your undivided attention, you're really focused. It is an intense thing. It's not a relaxed thing. Your brain, like when we're learning, there's an optimal state. It's not too relaxed, but then it's not too, like we would say, it's not too aroused, right?
Mhm.
There's this is in between state where you're excited, you're on your feet, like thinking about what's going to happen. Maybe not literally on your feet, but you get the idea. You're aware of it, you're looking, but you're not too far to the point where because if you want to think about it, you could get to the point where you're at a competition, you have a brain fart because you're too on edge, right? You're ramped up too much. But then at the same time, you can think about if you've ever competed and you just weren't there mentally and you got smashed by everybody because you're just felt like you're going through the motions. There's your extremes. We want to be somewhere in the middle. And so again, that said, those bouts of learning are intense. Like I was talking about the horse riding stuff. The horse riding stuff physically is not that bad on me. Physically, I'm okay. Right. I'm not sore from it. It doesn't beat me up. I mean, I literally put myself in car wrecks every day with people trying to choke me. It's fine.
Mm.
But the intense learning part where I'm using all these different muscles and I'm trying to navigate things with this horse, it's really intense physically or mentally. And after I'm done, I'm usually shot for a few hours. And, when I'm really trying to work on a technique and I'm really watching jiu-jitsu stuff, it's an intense exercise. Even think about this, guys. If you step off the mat and you have no idea what you could possibly work on, you didn't pay attention to your rolls. Now, I'm not saying if you're a white belt, you may not know all the ins and outs of what's going on. But you could still say, I got caught in a Kimura 3 damn times.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. Why did that happen? You can start thinking about why that could have possibly happened. If you're not going through your head and sort of thinking about what just happened here, what was this whole thing that was going on? And if you don't have something to work on, you're not watching your rolls mentally. And again, the physical part is very easy. It's the mental part that's very difficult, right? Being focused on this stuff, that's tough stuff.
Yeah.
This is like bodybuilding as an example, right? Bodybuilding, a lot of times we think of it as lifting weights. That is like the easiest part of bodybuilding. When you talk to a bodybuilder, lifting weights is fun. You go lift weights, pump iron, feels good. Going home and then mentally dealing with the fact that you're going to eat these meals on these hours, you don't get to eat all this food over here. Like it could be, you got to go to sleep at this time. It is a draining thing to be mentally disciplined in the way that they need to be, right? Like if you're going to go be like my coach Eli, who was competing at one point, if you're going to be a guy like that, who is, being so disciplined with his lifestyle, it's mentally taxing, right? That's the hard part for a lot of people. The physical work is usually pretty darn easy. And so again, with you guys listening, this is the issue. Like learning is an intense thing. You can't do it for very long without needing a break. And so what you want to do is when you go in there, you want to give yourself some focus. And this can also be a reason, just as an aside, where if you're training like 5 days a week, you may not be hyper focused 5 days a week. You may give yourself like, all right, I'm going to be hyper focused Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but on Tuesday, Thursday, I'm just going to go in and roll, just have fun. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to, because again, it can burn you out a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And especially if you don't have a coach to really guide things. Again, coaches probably do a great job for you. But again, if you're trying to take it upon yourself to learn a little extra, right? There may be times where you're going to be working on stuff that your coach isn't going on, and you're going to take the onus on yourself. Again, that takes a little bit more effort. And so those intense bouts of learning are tough, and you're only going to be able to do them for, somewhere maybe around an hour, depending on give or take.
Yeah.
And that's it. Some people say like 90 minutes, some people say 45 minutes. And so when you're studying an instructional, you shouldn't be studying it for hours.
Yeah.
Study it for a short bout, get the information, take notes, take pictures, write flow charts, do whatever you can do, play with the information as much as possible, because the more you play with the information in different ways, the more you're likely to retain it. And then you go try to use it, right? That's the idea. And then when you're using it in the gym, try to be as focused as you can. And at the same time, try to be as focused on what's happening during those rolls rather than just sort of going through them aimlessly. You want to be focused on like what just happened. And again, that's just some ideas.
Nice.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hopefully you got a couple ideas. If you have some instructionals sitting on the shelf that you want to, sitting on the proverbial shelf of digital content, right?
The digital shelf.
Yeah, the digital shelf. Maybe you have some DVDs, but they're sitting in your folder on your computer somewhere, or on the internet. Or if you're thinking about getting one, hopefully these give you some ideas on how to get one, how to use them. And again, these are not exhaustive. These are just some of the ones that I think could be really useful to many people as far as how to break them down and how to use them. But again, we could go on the subject for forever, because it's just essentially talking about learning. And another thing is that if you ever look into strategies for reading and learning other information, understand that applies to your instructionals as well, and your jiu-jitsu as well. So again, hopefully this is useful to you. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. Again, guys, I talk about them all the time. If recovery, from your exercise, your training and stuff like that, if it's important to you, if it's something you want to try to give it a boost, try out the products. You go to their website at charlottesweb.com. You can save 30% on the order using the promo code Jiu-Jitsu30. Again, I like this stuff. I know Eugene's used it. We've both been using it for several years. And I encourage most people to just try it. It may not be the best supplement for you. Everybody's body responds to supplements and, things like that differently, right? We all understand this. But again, I found that in a lot of people, it can be very useful. And so check it out at charlottesweb.com. EpicRollBJJ.com. If you're looking for some new gear, apparels, anything jiu-jitsu related, go to Matt's website. Matt is a black belt who makes jiu-jitsu gear for us as jiu-jitsu practitioners. EpicRollBJJ.com. I really like his stuff. We'll be doing some new jiu-jitsu gear this year made by Matt. And so again, I find his stuff high quality. He does a great job with customer service, so much so that, again, I'm happy to put my name on his stuff and share it with you guys. But if you guys want to check out some of his gis, rash guards, shorts, t-shirts, whatever it might be, go to EpicRollBJJ.com and use Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. And if you want to get access to our Patreon, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Jiu-Jitsu. the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to the exclusive library of content that we've developed, which again has basically it's a little episode with each one of the guests that we've had. And along with that, we put different bits and pieces from the episode or different ideas that we'd like to share with you. Everything is meant to be actionable, whether it's an idea to chew on, whether it's a warm-up routine that Eugene's developed for jiu-jitsu practitioners, whether it's me, showing you some rolling so that you can actually see how things look in live situations, whatever it might be. It's something to help your jiu-jitsu out. And again, if you want to get access to it, you can go to the website, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. You get access to the library and you get to support the podcast. And if you want to go to my website and get my daily email, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join, you'll get access to 2 free ebooks. They go into some ideas on how to develop game plans and also how to develop a strategy for implementing techniques and breaking through training plateaus. So if you feel like your training's getting a little sticky, not getting much better, great strategies in that. And then also you'll get my daily email afterwards where I will share different ideas with you that could be useful to you with your training on or off the mats. And so again, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll talk to you next week.